Okay, good morning, everybody. It's Peter Luke from Illumar here. Just letting a few more people sort of log in as I talk. Thanks for attending the session today. There's a lot of talk in housing about digitisation of services, but maybe less conversations about data management and data quality. And I read yesterday on LinkedIn that each person generates 1.7 megabytes of data per second. So it follows from that 90% of all data has been created in the last 2 years. So there's an awful lot of data being generated and will be generated. Because I can remember my first PC probably had about 5 megabytes of disk storage. So that'd be just over a couple of seconds worth of data. So what we'd like to do today is to talk a bit about data management, and in particular the journey that ForHousing's been on. ForHousing is a housing association in the northwest of England, and it manages around 24,000 properties. And they've recently adopted the Illumar Housing Data Enterprise technology. A review of that was produced by Tony Smith, who's on the panel today, who's that housing IT guy. And he had a few conversations with Zahir, blogged about it and said, well, maybe we should have a webinar to continue the conversation. And that's the basis of today. Format today is going to be pretty simple. We've put forward a few questions to sort of start a debate between Zahir and Tony, and there's an opportunity on the screen for any of the attendees to ask questions, and we'll try and pick off those questions as they arise, or we'll have some time at the end to pick up anything else, and if necessary we can unmute participants, and we can sort of really engage in that debate. We'll be recording the session as well, just so you know, and hopefully we'll all be done and dusted within the hour. So I think we're looking like we're getting up to a full sort of quorum of attendees. So I suppose without further ado, I'll move on to the first sort of question point that we've raised. Around well, how bad is data quality in housing, and how does it compare to other industries? And I think Tony will maybe sort of kick off, introduce himself properly, and then on to Zahir.
Okay, cheers, Pete. I'm Tony Smith, and I blog as that housing IT guy. You might know me from Twitter as well. I was an IT guy on Twitter. Good to be here this morning. It's quite an interesting whole idea, really, this problem we seem to have in housing. And I know when I've chatted with Zahir, known Zahir for some time, we've often talked about this and lamented, why is housing different? And both me and Zahir have spent some time in retail. I've spent some time in the kind of, mid-80s in retail, and I sort of revisited it back probably about 8-9 years ago when I did a project where I was actually aggregating data for, I don't know whether you've heard of JD Williams, who are behind brands like Giacomo and kind of that whole fast fashion thing. And when I've looked at other sectors, and obviously make that comparison, that contrast with housing, other sectors seem to have, a lot of the data better tied down. It tends to have systems from maybe one source or maybe a couple of sources. And I used to find, particularly the projects I did, every quarter, I used to look at 5 gigabytes of, it was actually underwear data. So I was, up to my ankles in underwear data for 3 months of the year. And that data was mined from the internet, from M&S, Primark, JD Williams brands, all sorts of sources. Trying to actually bring that data together was a nightmare. And it was clear to me that comparing data across that sector was difficult, but within a single organisation, that was a lot more coherent. And it's something within housing that I'm involved in procurement, and I know quite well that some organisations quite easily, you can have such a disparity of systems. Bringing that data together, matching it up, even knowing where the right piece of data, where is the original piece of the truth, that is absolutely crazy. And probably Zahir, you'd probably pick up from that, I guess. And what was your feeling coming into the housing sector, from something a lot more orderly?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. First of all, I was still at school in the mid-80s whilst you were working on that data, so nice to hear. I'm Zahir. Good morning, all. I joined for Viva and of course for housing 2 years ago. The 10 to 12 years before that, I worked for an American firm that was providing analytic solutions out to largely grocers across Europe and North America. So it was an interesting shift, Tony, coming from where I was. It was quite pervasive. We had highly skilled teams where I was, and then coming into housing, I guess from a cultural perspective, from a maturity perspective, for housing, it was at that time the opposite end of the spectrum. Retail on a whole is obviously a varied sector. Certainly the type of grocers like Tesco that I worked with, to gain competitive advantage, they were more and more seeking real-time analytics. The systems, you can probably imagine the data, the volumes of data that's seen a real swell over the last 10 years. And we're starting to see that across housing, certainly with sensors and more data coming in from different sources. And again, from a retail perspective, the customer data is really well exploited naturally. And again, from a housing perspective, 2 years ago, I wasn't seeing that for housing, but certainly now there's a real shift in that balance where we're seeing a lot more demand for customer data. So again, back when I started for housing, we had a small team. It was largely a reporting service that we provided. So someone from within a department would ask for data and we'd either provide it in Excel or SSRS. We had one server at the time, and overnight we'd take the data in, we'd take a snapshot from QL, which is our housing management system, and bounce our requests off the back of the snapshot and serve it out, like I said, in SSRS. That's changed a lot over the last 2 years. The architecture has really changed. And we're closer to where retail is. Just going back to retail, it's not perfect. The traditional bricks and mortar retailers, they're still slow on the digital transformation piece. And how we, from a housing sector, we're pushing on all fronts from a digital transformation perspective. So that will change the landscape. So on a whole, we don't compare too badly with retail, but certainly the front runners have had a lot more investment, a lot more time and bigger teams to start looking at data management.
Okay, thanks for that, Zahir. I just remind people, if you've got any questions, stick them in. The second point really is what were you seeking to do, Zahir, in looking for a solution, and what are you trying to do with the data that you've already collected? Yeah,
so the question I've got here is why sustainable solutions required to these issues, and I'm thinking about the opposite. So if it's not a sustainable issue, what does it look like over the next, let's just say 12 months? So we know the volume of data is increasing. And I know within my own team, I've got one data quality analyst, and I've just brought in a data manager. So I've strengthened, so I've doubled up. So there's two people actively fixing data as we go. I would say the ratios, to put it this way, unbalanced. We've got far many more people breaking the data, let's say breaking the data, than we are fixing it. And I know the quality analyst is inundated. We just can't keep up with the demand of data issues, or couldn't. So what we've done, we've improved our architecture. Rather than looking at one system, we've brought our 3 core systems into the Illumar environment, the HDE. We want to actively reduce the number of spreadsheets. It has been a place of spreadsheet anarchy, manual manipulation. So when we talk about sustainable solution, the number of spreadsheets will keep increasing unless it is sustainable. Users won't trust our data. And if a user doesn't trust our data, all the work that we do, it doesn't stack up. I know coming into housing early on, we had good ideas, we pushed out reports, but then we're looking at the usage stats around those reports, and it'd be a head scratcher as to why people really weren't taking those reports up and why we couldn't embed them. And I think one of the big reasons for that is a lack of trust in the data that we've got, and people have got their workflows where they're used to receiving data, working with it in Excel, and manually manipulating that data to a comfort level that they had around the organization. So it's all in all, if we don't have a sustainable solution, the culture won't change.
Zahir, I mean, I totally agree with you there, as you know, and I think, you know, for me, I think we look less at the source systems, and we look less at, as you said, all the users who are breaking the data. We seem to leap too fast into visualization tools, and, you know, whether that's Click or Power BI or whatever it was, and they're great tools, but it's no use hanging those tools on the end of something that's quite fragile and flimsy. And I think, you know, the place to rectify the problem is before those visualization tools, as you say, Zahir, I think. And I think as well, the really big thing that people shy away from, and I've been involved in projects around this where people are afraid, or they don't feel they're empowered to go and fix the underlying issues with the data. In fact, most quality teams and performance teams, and they should be 2 sides of a coin, shouldn't they? Performance and quality are usually reporting teams who spend the time massaging the data, making it look shiny, present it to the board or present it to other people. And as you say, Zahir, by the time people have manipulated those things to take out the long-running voids that shouldn't be there, take out the garages that will never let, you know, adjust the gas servicing program or whatever else, you know, people look at that and they say, well, that's not actually what's happening on the ground. And I think, like, the thing that I find missing, Zahir, and something that I know you've tackled in your project, is very much that when you've identified data, and then you've got methodology in place to improve the data and actually route it back to the people breaking it in the first place. And I've blogged about this, and I'm quite passionate about. I've seen this in practice where I've been on site somewhere. There was an issue it was actually an issue in the DLO and the contractor system, where a job had been done. A person was asked for on the doorstep to complete a satisfaction questionnaire, and they said, "Oh, she's not in yet. Oh, when will she be in? Well, when she gets home from school." And they were asking for an 8-year-old child to complete the satisfaction questionnaire, A load of rumpus kicked up. And when we actually looked at it in the round, the problem was actually in the team that signed up tenancies. And they were using the system incorrectly. They were flagging the wrong person as the main contact on the account. And when we looked at it, we identified another 185 instances in that organisation, and we tracked it down to 2 members of staff. And the only way, I said the only way you're going to solve this is identify them on a regular basis, send them back to those members of staff, a bit like if you had you were training a puppy or something like that to kind of, don't do those behaviours, to potty train them out of breaking that data so that they take pride in the data, they keep it accurate, they follow all those GDPR principles, and at the end of the day, we've got something brilliant to report on. And I think, I'd be interested how you found that that's worked inside ForHousing, Zahir, when you've tried to enforce that, because obviously your data team alone can't fix that problem, can they?
Yeah, that's right. And when we think people, process, technology, for me, it is in that order. And it's a really good pickup that we dive towards the tech. We can do, it's an easy place to start and then try and reverse engineer from there. But certainly from a people perspective, what does data governance mean? How do we manage our data better from a people perspective and then a process? But certainly from a technology perspective, what is it that drew me to this product? With a small team and a busy team, I knew that I needed a data warehouse, or a single, as we call it, a single place, or a single point, or a single version of the truth. And it just wasn't going to happen. It could take us years to build that on top of what we're doing. And then do I truly trust that that'll give us what we need when we'd be spending most of our time coding it? And having seen the Illumar product, it was an easy choice for me because that does de-risk, and we talk about speed. So from a tech point, that was my starting point. But of course, I mentioned that I brought in a data manager as well, and all the way up to the top of the organisation and soon across the board as well. We're looking at how data governance works, how we escalate these issues, how we bring people together to discuss the issues and find the right solution for them.
I mean, I think you're dead right there, Zahir, and I think that view of thinking about it as a problem across the whole organisation is really important, and I think there needs to be leadership from the top. And like I remember, and it was probably getting on for 2.5, must be more than 2.5 years actually, just before the GDPR regulation came in. I remember doing a 40-minute slot down at Nightstone Housing, who are now Live West, down in the Somerset area, and Somerset and Dorset, where they took a whole day and they took all the staff out for a day, pretty much 2/3 of the staff, to just talk about data for a day, make them understand the importance of accurate data, how it affects service, how it affects our customers, how it affects staff, how it affects decision making and insight internally in the organisation. And to this day, that's the only time I've ever seen an event like that where a landlord has actually taken it so seriously that they'll use that to embed a what I would probably call a proper data culture, Zahir, because it's important for them, and it's certainly important for yourselves and the performance teams, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We get it across housing. There's no question. From experience, we know the values of data. We know the value of getting it right and using accurate data and providing that out to the business users quickly. We do get it. And certainly I've seen more and more of that over the last 2 years, where I said that the culture at ForHousing has changed massively over 2 years, and especially, like I mentioned, from a customer and agility perspective. So how do we improve our processes? How do we serve the customer or the tenant better? That the demand, that level of insight is just gone through the roof. With that said, Tony, historically, would you have said that across housing, in your experience, that we could take data issues up to the exec team and talk about them openly, and we think we'd get answers and resolutions there?
Never. In the past, probably never, Zahir. And I think the only thing that's really sharpened that focus that I've seen in the last couple of years is GDPR and that whole aspect of that. And that, I think now, a lot of senior management teams and boards, they get it, and they're starting to understand that the most important thing in the organisation to have right is data. And that's the way that they're going to survive and they're going to thrive going forward. And I think it is GDPR has made that difference. But you know, it's still like turning around that evergreen thing in the Suez Canal. You know what I mean? It's like that. You know, that's what I'm finding anyway. But I do, you know, I do recognise, you know, you've had fantastic success at ForHousing there. And I think it needs, you know, proper leadership from above to achieve that. And I think people need to be managed really well, because quite often I found in introducing new solutions, new systems, replacing systems, people realise, oh, I've got some more work to do now. I never had to do that before. You know, that's going backwards. It's like, no, you're not going backwards. You should have been doing this all along. You know what I mean? And that conversation needs to be had with staff. Managers need to understand it, and I think, you know, we need to move to a kind of a new normal around data and the accuracy of it, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree, Tony. And we've spoken about this in the past, that typically it's seen as an IT issue. Data is an IT issue, and I'm pleased to say that's rapidly changing across housing.
Yeah, me too on that one.
Okay, thanks guys. Moving on to the next one, coming a bit close to home there, maybe, is about creating and delivering, you know, what we believe to be a really successful sort of data management project strategy. And I don't know if you want to pick that one up, Zahir, about your strategy and how it's been created and how you've actually delivered this project.
Yeah, so a little bit more history here. When I started, there was some attempts to running projects around data quality or data quality projects. So there'd been a push to say we really need to look at our data quality levels. So let's get something going. Me personally, it's not in my thinking to start a project like that without a strategy. I don't think data management is a start and end, and we throw some budget at it and magically, you know, data fixes. It's perpetual, it's ongoing. So the strategic approach to it is certainly the best. But then the strategy isn't, for me, just about data accuracy. We've talked about it, we're going to have increasing volumes of data. So can we fix everything? Of course we can't. You know, we've got to start somewhere. So the strategy for me is about where do we start? And I started on what I call the offense side. So if we talk about defensive uses of data or offense type uses of data, the analytics and the predictive analytics and the data science, all of that fits to the right hand side where it's offense. And the reason I did that is because, for one, it was about building relationships across the organisation and truly getting an understanding of our data assets and what we're trying to do with them, whether that's from a idealistic perspective, we want to be here, or, you know, what are we doing with that data today? Because we use data. Even at that time, we used it well, but it was in silo and I really didn't understand how we were using it. So from getting a better understanding of how we use data across income or a service centre really started to inform me on what we'd need to do from a defensive perspective as well. So one informed the other. and that was the strategic choice I took. But I wouldn't solely write a data strategy based on data management. I'd build it out from a perspective of what's the value of the data.
I think you're spot on there, Zahir, if I might say. I mean, and I get asked this quite often when I get involved in things like asset management projects, particularly where people are moving from a badly managed system or spreadsheets to, say, recording all the component of their asset management data. And usually suppliers come along and say, well, it's a blank piece of paper, you can have whatever you like. And I'm often asked, how much data should we be storing here? How many components should we have? And my stock answer is, the smallest number that we can get away with. If that data is not, it's not giving us any payback, we're not using it for some purpose, we might not use it for some future purpose, it's not in a KPI, it's not in a board report. Actually, should we even have it there? And I think a lot of people love the idea of sticking with asset management, for instance. We've had surveys going back 15 years. We've got all that data, how fabulous that is, but do we ever use it? Is it up to date? Actually, you've done capital works and renewals. Where are they in your data? They're not sitting in your filing cabinet or your hard disk or in the cloud or wherever. If that data is not being turned over, it's not being used, then what's the point of having it? And I think one question that people often need to be asked, and I'm sure you've had this when you've engaged with teams and your internal customers, Zahir, is what do we actually use this for? Is it even worth collecting it and maintaining it? And I think the surprising thing that I find is often when I say to people have asked me sometimes, well, why is that important? And I've said, well, it's important because there's a cost collecting all of this and maintaining it. They're like, why spend that money if we're not getting any benefit from it in the business, or there's no potential to? And I think, and as anybody who reads my blog or encounters me, they'll probably hear that lemon drizzle cake story. But often the answer is, we've always collected it, Tony, we've always done that. It's like, well, just find out what are we doing with it, and maybe consider not doing it. And that's a massive challenge here, I think, in housing.
Yeah. But one thing we can agree on, though, is we all need to do the SDR, and we've all got KPIs.
Yeah.
So that's an easy place for us to start, and that's what we're implementing right now. And the value of that is it's cross-cutting. KPIs and SDR cross-cutting, so it does start lending itself into what are the reusable data sets across the organisation. So that's, I would recommend looking at those two for sure.
Got a question for you here, really, is about how you actually, you maybe touched on it there, but how are you actually communicating these sort of benefits and things like the SDR? Is that something you can hold up to the board and say, look, here's some benefits from the implementation, rather, and actually start communicating that out to the organisation?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question, that, and I think it's done on multiple fronts. The users will always advocate. If something's improved to that extent, the users will do that, and that's part of the culture. But otherwise, it is reinforcing that message at the different forums. We do need to demo and play it back, and we do need to ask for that time proactively. I'm fairly fortunate in that there's a lot of interest in what we're doing, and that's, again, simple techniques like stories through the internet, demoing, showcasing, and taking simple steps like that. In terms of board, it's still work in progress, and exec team. There's a much bigger interest and wider interest there now in our roadmap, if you like.
Zahir, how have you dealt with, and I've seen this myself in projects where something's been done around better management of data and better reporting, where people have been reporting one figure, one very positive figure for the last 2 years. And then actually when you get the reality of it and you actually go, you know what, that was, you know, over reported by probably a factor of 25% or something, whereby something in the team's eyes or the user's eyes, we're going to go backwards because somebody's shown a light on this. How have you dealt with that for Viva, where you've found, you know, you've revealed actually we were reporting, or we were massaging data and reporting, you know, over optimistically, and we've got to scale back to something that actually, you know, you can drill down now to the data and say, well, that's exactly where that figure's come from, but it's worse than we have been reporting. You know, how have you handled that interpersonally with the teams? Have you had that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tony. I don't think it's a case of over-reporting or even massaging the data. And we're talking about retail, and this is my experience of retail. It's still there as well. We're talking about definitions. What's the definition? What, you know, how we captured that definition? Does that definition change for one purpose compared to another? An operational definition might be different to a reporting definition, and that can impact the number that we're reporting on typically, or how we use that particular piece of data. So again, that's about getting people together, and if the number has reduced, then openly explain why and how that has, due to the definitions. But capturing those different definitions is key.
Agreed.
Okay. Quick question for you both. In terms of what other options did you consider, other than using our fantastic Illumar housing data enterprise solution, plug, and really what, you know, in terms of the, you know, why you came down the route you did come down, Zahir, and maybe Tony will have some comments on that as of what the alternatives might be.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief on this one. Coming into ForHousing, I was already of the mindset that we're going to build something. When I quickly assessed what was going on, it was like, right, I want to build something. But it was slightly naive because I didn't fully understand the skill set of the team. And it took me a few months to realise that that's not going to be an option. So having met Craig Round at Regenda, he kindly demoed the implementation of the Illumar product there. And then following that, which I really liked, you know, what I really liked about that at the time was that it just takes the work out. You don't need to be the most skilled team. Don't get me wrong, the team that I've got is exceptionally good at writing SQL. That's their forte. But building a data warehouse, it's not what they build reports, not data warehouses. So I had to de-risk it, and the Illumar environment makes it really easy to integrate the data. So my team couldn't at that time write SSI packages, for example, and the Illumar product really simplifies that to the point where you don't need much training. So it's about speed and acceleration for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Zahir, the point that I saw from Regenda and what you've done yourselves that I quite liked about it, and I concur with what you said there, Zahir. I know you've got some pretty technical people there that you're working with, but in terms of doing something DIY homegrown around building your own data warehouse, in my experience then, a lot of people have made some fantastic quick wins, different organizations, but you lose 2 or 3 good developers, then that knowledge just walks right out the organization. And that's because with the best will in the world, the last thing that developers or people in IT teams do is generate accurate documentation. So, you know, inevitably we're building something that's going to work very, very well within the organization, but it's a bit of an Achilles heel as well. And I think the thing for me that I looked at this solution and the way it's being used, with yourselves and Regenda, is it's more or less self-documenting of how you build that. So actually, if you have those fantastic people you've got in the team there, if they did move on or whatever, you got someone else to slot into that. Actually, the platform itself has actually picked up 85%, 95% of that legwork of doing that. So it in a way, that aspect of it future-proofs it. And the other thing I hear is, if ForHousing at some point said, right, we want to change our asset management system, or we want to change our contractor solution, or we're going to get into care and support in a big way, and we're going to have something else we bolt on. That's quite easy to slot in, a bit like pieces in a jigsaw, rather than having to go and revisit something very bespoke again that needs to be unpicked. People need to work out how that works. That problem is kind of taken away a bit, and I have seen lots of organisations come unstuck, when they've lost key developers, or they've retired, or they've moved on, or in some cases I've worked with some excellent people, and unfortunately they've emigrated to Australia and stuff like that. And I've said, I'm gutted, mate. I'm pleased for you, but I'm gutted at the same time, because I'm gonna, lose, best developer in the team or something. But those things happen, and I think one thing about the platform is it does document all those things, and it does it in a very natural way. You don't have to be a space cadet on SSRS packages or wherever else. It's there, and it's in almost a pseudo English kind of way it's documented.
Yeah, it does certainly simplify things, and just on another front, architecturally, it's really kicked us on. So I talked about that one server that we had 2 years ago. One server goes down, all our reporting capabilities have gone down. It was on-prem. So when I speak about a modern analytics platform with my exec team, they probably wonder what I'm talking about. But having the cloud option was big for me, without going into detail and the advantages of cloud. So obviously the Illumar project gave us that. And on top of that, we now have a development environment, a pre-production environment, and a production environment. And it just de-risks us. Those times of the server going down and all our reports not being available to us and then playing catch up isn't an option in the future forward. So we need that uptime, and we need that consistency there as well.
Yeah. Question just to pick up on the issues you're just talking about, this idea of technical debt within sort of housing organisations, and I just wondered whether sort of Tony and Zahir, you could just comment on this idea of technical debt, where it's measured. So if you haven't done anything with your systems for a number of years, or your developer clears off to Australia or whatever, do you actually have a way of actually understanding where you are with that at any given point?
To be honest, Pete, with that, I mean, looking at it from a very a purely, I don't know, coming at it from a view of seeing lots of organisations, because I tend to, probably over the last 9-10 years, I've probably worked with a good, 100 or more projects and 80 or more customers. And what I do find is actually that problem is usually the thing that comes out the blue for most of them. And when it occurs, or even in reviews and so on, usually and it sounds crazy this, but a really rare thing that people seem to have is like a skills analysis of the staff, to actually see their Achilles heels in front of them. And I know when I was, back at MIS at a supplier, we had matrix like that was updated kind of almost, monthly, basically, because if you had people with certain skills, you'd make sure that you mitigated issues, you train people and so on. But, amazingly, lots of organisations I've worked with, that's happened and it totally blindsided them. They're not aware of the risk of that. The only times they are aware of it is when it's happened in the past, and then they shit out on it then. Do you know what I mean? And that's the wrong time for it to happen. I don't know how you've seen that here.
You touched on it earlier, Tony. In the past, you know, we work it out after someone's left and we take the power. But you know, it shouldn't be like that, because we're talking about BI standards and development standards, perhaps in a data ops environment or even a DevOps type environment, where we've got to de-risk, and we can't afford for that to happen, for someone to leave and then we try and pick those pieces up, especially where there's key data sets involved. And I think about the SDR, and when I arrived for housing, all the knowledge was with one person or two people. So they're off sick. What do we do? You know, it's a real panic at that point if that was to happen. So when we talk about documentation, we want to work in an agile way. So we don't want to be writing massive documents. So we need that environment again to be able to self-document, so we can trace the data through. We can see that all the SQL or whatever code's being used or whatever package is being used is available to us, and we can reverse engineer the situation. Now, if we don't implement those standards or have that environment, I don't know where someone's putting their code. It could be on their desktop, along with the computer where the hard drive's gone on it. And it happens, and I'm being flippant, but it does happen, because developers are typically in a rush and they need to get work done. So then if there's no standard to follow, they won't be doing that off their own backs.
I agree, Zahir. Absolutely agree. And you know, I've been there, like you've possibly been there in the past. You know, I've been a developer in my time and a business analyst, and actually I wasn't the best at documenting what I was doing. And the most amazing thing that I found here is, you know, the first few sectors and jobs that I was in, I was amazed when I handed in my resignation letter, and I had a month served. You know, very rarely did anyone try hard to get all that information out of my head in that 5 weeks, which was amazing. Because clearly, you know, with the mindset I've got and the job that I do now, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Because why would you not do that? But even better, if you've got a means of documenting all of that more or less comes as a byproduct of solving the problem, then why would you not do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. And the type of teams the type of team I've got as well, Tony, on top of that, they enjoy working with the customer, solving the customer's problems rather than fixing data issues for, you know, 2/3 of the data times. So that's important. So why would people leave in the first place? It's probably through chaos. It's probably through the fact that the data is all over the shop, if you put it that way. So, you know,
on that point as well, Zahir, there, just while it's in my mind, I know before we were talking about, you know, and I know you're pretty technical, your team are pretty technical, but it occurs to me that for the approach to be successful, those people need to be people, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back down to the strategy as well, doesn't it? And we said people, process, technology in that order. When we talk about people, we've got to think about the skill set of that data team and how customer facing they are versus how developmental they are as well. And I want less emphasis on the development, more emphasis on those people skills and understanding what the business needs are.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'll just move on to a final question, and then we'll open it up a bit. So just looking forward to a glorious future where we can automate all of these things. What are the benefits that you perceive from automating a lot of this data feed, and what's it going to eliminate in your organisations?
Well, could I
Go for it,
Zahir, in a second? Sorry,
sure.
Pete. If I could probably put something in first, and I'm sure, I hope you'll agree with me, Zahir, you might not. But I think for me, answering that question and probably looking at how the platform works, one of the biggest parts of it around the automation is that incorporation of dealing with poor data, bad data, data that doesn't really fit together with data coming from other sources. And I think for me, and I think the part of the solution, Pete, is you call it daily, don't you?
Yeah.
And it's like putting your data in jail and deciding, do you let that through? Do you change it? Do you transform it? Do you basically create a feedback loop? And I think for me, that is one of the key components for me that mean that the automation becomes something that adds value. And I think to get that jail it piece and the improvement of data working well, it needs that thing we were talking about before, Zahir, isn't it? The people, the people-centered approach with the teams to kind of get them to understand how their habits and how they manage data, sometimes badly, impacts on the whole, everything that happens downstream with your team. So I think for me, that's something that around the automation, I mean, I've seen plenty of automation that takes the garbage from here and adds, moves it over here. I think the thing about this platform is you've got this gated area in the middle that if you use it well, it's effectively cleaning that data, it's picking out issues and gives you that ability to make sure you've got continuous improvement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you can do with it, Tony, of course, is you can apply your own business rules to it, or you could apply third-party business rules. So things like the hacked sort of UK data standards, you can apply those rules and make sure that any data that's pulled through sort of accords to whatever rules that you choose to impose. But,
sorry, Zahir, go on. Sorry for
No, it's nice to put, Tony. That's fine. I was just going to say, obviously, naturally, all for automation. Why do something over and over again and spend the time doing it when we can automate it? But it's not as easy as it sounds. You go to that team that's been involved with pulling together the LGSR data, for example. Tell them that you're going to automate their world. They'll be all up for it. But what they want is assurance that when it's automated, we feel comfortable that it's not missed anything. And that's level of comfort. And again, that's going to come through those relationships and highlighting the benefits of the automation tools and the stack and parallel testing, all of that. But if we don't automate, we don't change the culture. And we continue to spend hours and hours doing the same things when we can spend a fraction of that time doing that. I don't think people join operational to think that they are going to play with spreadsheets for half the week, trying to manipulate the data to get it right. It's understanding those processes, it's understanding workflows, it's understanding the opportunities, but you're absolutely right. If we don't get automation right, then all we're doing is automating a bad set of data, and the end result is probably worse at that point. So if we're going to automate it, let's do it properly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as well, Zahir, like we've talked about in the past quite a bit as well, is that actually, if you've got the buy-in and people trust the automation, it cuts out all of any data meddling, embellishing, polishing. You see in the unvarnished truth, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, where do we start on that? We go back to the strategy side of things and start on something small, prove it out, and learn from that. And there will be people with the experience of having automated processes around the business, pull them together and see what you can apply to it.
Okay, thanks, Go. We had a question about how are you planning to capture the sort of direct savings from this Illumar implementation at ForViva, Zahir? Are you planning to measure the impact it's had? How would you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big ones is time saved. So we did an audit across the organisation to say how long is it taking us to pull the KPIs together, how many people are involved within the STR, the production of that. And on an ongoing basis, we've got a roadmap far enough ahead to say what we're going to build in this environment. So currently we're building out a finance transformation project, which is going to bring big benefits to us. And again, that because we've got the finance system pulled into the environment, it's within the project briefs. So we're capturing the benefits at the project brief level and within the business cases, and going back at a project by project level to add that.
Okay. And in terms of thinking down that theme here, where do you see this sort of process going next in your organisation?
So what do we want to adopt within that environment, within the environment? The big things for me are customer data. So we'll make a push on that. But we've got, you know, so many different areas of business that we've hit in the last 2 years that we want to now pick up and build back in the HDE. So the service centre data is another one for us. So again, it's about working with the transformation programme to align that roadmap. There's something to be said for pulling in new projects into that environment versus projects that we've already completed, which we want to lift and shift, and it's getting that balance right between the two.
Okay, thanks for that. I suppose I'll put the floor open to any further questions, if there's any sort of burning issues, or if I've not given chance for Tony to offer some sort of final views, we can pick that up now.
No, I'm fairly comfortable really with what we've covered there. I mean, I think one other aspect that's quite an interesting one, that it might not be one that's a problem that Zahir and his team need to solve, or the guys at Magenta either. Like kind of you know, when I've been kind of looking at this platform, quite often people are turning this, you know, using this solution to tie together their existing data that's probably from a lot of desperate housing solutions and asset management or care and support or contractor or whatever, and actually making sense of that into what becomes effectively a reporting data warehouse platform. One thing that clearly these days, one thing that I get asked a lot about, and I get involved in some projects around it, is things like people moving to Dynamics and other platforms like Salesforce, or and actually it occurs to me that quite often a lot of those projects progress without a coherent data structure to start with, and pretty much the output of what, you know, Zahir and Regenda have actually created, which is, you know, where the SDR is coming out of, how the board reports are coming out of. Actually, a lot of people considering moving to Dynamics, it'd actually be, you know, quite useful to kind of use this process in reverse, you know, with a tool like Illumar, because effectively we end up with something that's quite, you know, a lot more normalized than possibly what people are starting with as a starting point, moving to something like Dynamics, Salesforce, and so on. So, you know, I think that's possibly another way that people could use this tool. I think, I don't know whether you've considered that, Pete, in your when you've been working with people so far.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that I think some of the discussions I'm having with people right now is that they're saying, well, we need to write a data strategy, and that's good, or we need to buy, you know, we need to buy some new systems first, and then we need to go and think about our data warehousing sort of type solution. And very often the answer I'd give to them is, well, actually, this could actually be a good project to do first.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, what you've described there is, and I sometimes have this. Lots of people say to me, you know, will you come and work with us, Tony, and help us get rid of this? And I'll go, well, what problem are we solving? And you know, like that is a bit like the same as what you've described there, Pete, with, well, we'll change our systems and then we'll work out how we're going to tie the data together to what we want. Why not start, you know, as you say, you know, not putting the cart before the horse, you know, start in the right order and say, actually, this is what we want come out of our systems. Let's go and make sure we either buy systems that can take us there, or we design something like Dynamics around it. I think, you know, anybody on this call who's ever sat through a supplier demo of any solution, housing or contractor or whatever, you know, at what point do they show you the reporting? It's not the first thing they show you, and half the time it's not even that bit at the end. You know, these systems that we're purchasing are not designed with that in mind. It's about kind of how we crunch and process that data, not exactly how we get the, you know, the benefits on the other side of it, really. And I think, you know, with platforms like Dynamics, great platforms, if you've got the you know, that vision and you know, that's a direction you want to go in. But I think certainly start with the data structure that will support your business, your KPIs, your insight, and everything else. Start with that, and then actually go from there and build your thing at the front end. You know, I agree with you on that one, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology itself was actually sort of developed across sort of health and finance over the last 20 years. So the basic architecture that sits underneath it, you know, in many of our views, sort of, can exist as a data management strategy. There's 12 or so different modules that sit within the platform, and they can all address different sort of components of any data management strategy. And I suppose what we are is we're pretty source system technology agnostic. So we are actively looking to work with the various suppliers of the source systems technology. We'll happily work with those and work with other sort of technologies out there, because they can all benefit from this sort of creation of a single version of the truth within the organization. And actually doing that actually, you know, opens up lots of opportunities within those organizations. I'm sort of conscious of the time, so I'd like to sort of maybe just final comment from Tony and Zahir, and we'll look to sort of wrap up.
Yeah, just final comment, Pete, just on this one, just to finish off on it. At some point, the vision is all of our intelligence, all of our data, all of our reporting will come from this single version of the truth. And I'm looking at probably the next 18 months to get there. So less SSRS reports, more reports driven out of this one version and out into Power BI on the cloud.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my last comment as well, I'd agree with kind of what Zahir's mentioned there about kind of the way you've gone forward with it. I think my last comment with this was very much about, you know, probably how impressed I was. I don't know whether this is a reflection on you and your teams, Zahir, or the Illumar tool, but, you know, the speed that you've moved from, you know, with getting your structure together inside what 4 or 5 months really is something that, you know, I've worked with lots of people who've, you know, they're into like the second and third year of trying to kind of sort out that cat's cradle of the data. So I think for me, it's more, I can see how this would slot into a lot of organizations and get them moving very quickly in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we put that data structure together. But clearly, as I think we've said, there needs to be a people aspect for that as well, and that's crucial, Zahir, isn't it? To make sure management are on board, teams are on board, and everybody buys into the solution really, which is, you know, it's not a technology problem, that it's a people and management problem.
Okay, thanks Tony, thanks Zahir, and thanks for everyone for joining today. There's a case study around the implementation at ForHousing on our website, and I know Zahir is more than happy to sort of pick up conversations with people who'd like to know a little bit more. So thanks everyone for joining, and everyone can go forward to our 11 o'clock Zoom meeting now. Thanks everyone.
All right, cheers, thank you.